Hey everybody, some gadget guy here with another Showdown Fight for Blood. So I already did a video comparing the LG G4 to the Galaxy Note 5, and that I think is a comparison that isn't necessarily totally appropriate, as I still think the Note is a little bit more of a productivity smartphone as opposed to an all-rounder flagship phone. But of course, now we've got to compare the LG G4 to the Galaxy S6 Edge Plus, I hate that name, and this I think is a little bit more of a direct comparison. The Edge Plus is a bigger screened Galaxy S device, and there's definitely more of a focus on fashion than on productivity when it comes to this S6. Immediately though, we need to compare these displays. We've got 2560 by 1440 on both of these screens. We're using the new IPS Quantum LCD panel from LG. It does help take the brightness and the contrast up a notch, but it's not going to compare to the insane outdoor brightness mode and the crazy contrast ratios that you get on an AMOLED screen. Case in point, to match the exposure for my camera, maxing out the screen on the LG G4 is around 2/3 of the controllable brightness on the Edge Plus. And you can see in our full review on the S6 Edge Plus, we do an outdoor brightness mode comparison, and the Edge just completely walks away with the victory there. And when it just comes to the overall build quality and hardware, Samsung is using more premium materials and a more premium finish with this glass and metal combination. There is no plastic anywhere around the edges, sides, front, or back on the Edge Plus. But when compared to phones like the G4 or even just the Note 5 itself, I can't say I'm a huge fan of phones with all glass backs, and then the angled sides on the Edge Plus make hand feel just a little bit less pleasant. This is sort of a sharp seam that runs along the sides of the phone, and that's how you'll mostly be holding it, especially when you're trying to shoot photos or videos. To avoid the pads of your fingers rolling onto the screen, you're really going to be holding onto this on a very thin seam where the glass and the metal meet. And even though Samsung has done an amazing job of cramming a larger screen into a smaller form factor than last year's Note 4 and Note Edge, there is still a little bit more of either a fingertip balance or hand dance to reach controls under the display. Moving over to the G4, LG definitely saved some cash by using plastic as the primary material wrapping the sides of the phone. And it is a little bit thicker with a very similar screen to front face bezel ratio as the Edge Plus. But flipping it over, if you've been following my channel at all, you know that I'm a huge fan of sort of these alternative materials that we might use on the back of our phones. Leather on a Moto X, leather on the G4, matte finish polycarb on phones like the Nokia Lumias, or even just the rubbery leather that you can find on the back of a phone like the Note 4. I think this is nicer in the hand. I think it's a little easier to hold on to, especially if you have sweaty paws like I do. And the little bits of wear and tear that you do get on leather actually look kind of cool as the leather ages, and then when it starts to get a little too gnarly, you just rip off this back plate, buy a new one, pop it on, and you're good to go again, like you've got a brand new phone. And with the screen being just a tiny touch smaller and the controls for your device being on-screen controls as opposed to capacitive buttons below, there's a little bit less of the hand dance for me to reach the bottom of the phone to get to some of these options. And in fact, we have a nice little ergonomic touch where I can add a notification shade drop down so that when I'm primed to use the back button or the home button, I don't have to reach up to the top of the phone to hit the slider. I can just reach down here where my thumb's naturally gonna fall anyway, and I get my notification shade. Of course, one of my favorite showdowns is always the camera, and these two represent class-leading imaging affairs. Both of these phones have moved up to half-inch sensors, and they provide stunning depth of field for a phone, wonderful 16 megapixel stills, and both are capable of shooting UHD video with optical image stabilization. When it comes to the hardware, they both compete against each other very well, though I do give the subtle nod to the G4 for its laser focus. This is kind of a gimmick, but the focusing system on LG phones is very smooth. It's not faster, but it rolls into focus in a very sure-footed way, where there's a little bit more of a pulse into the focus on Samsung phones. Now getting into the camera software, now we're dealing with a much more nuanced difference between two titans of smartphone photography. When we're dealing with the auto modes, I really do like that LG keeps their overall look and display a little bit simpler. In fact, they've got 3 tiers. If you want, you can go into a super simple mode where you just tap on the screen and it's gonna focus on whatever you tap on and automatically take a picture. It's the most streamlined interface you can have on any phone for taking photos. But moving up into auto, we at least get a little bit more control over things like what mode we want to be in, if we want to be in panorama or in dual camera using both the front and back. And then we have quick toggles for things like the resolution and aspect ratio, and whether or not we want to use voice commands, a timer, enable the grid, move to the SD card, or enable HDR mode. Whereas on Samsung, we have a lot more to play with in its automatic mode, where we have automatic real-time filters or sort of Instagram style effects that we can apply to our photos. We also have a quick toggle for HDR mode, the timer, how we want to enable or disable the flash, and then the same aspect ratio and resolution controls. Then tapping onto this gear icon, we get expanded menus for things like video resolution, tracking autofocus points, grid lines, location. But if you're a camera snob like I am, you probably spend more of your time shooting in manual or in pro mode, depending on which phone you have. And for software layout, this is where I'm going to give a nod to the G4. I love the way that all of these controls and icons flank your composition window as opposed to constantly moving in on your composition window. And what do I mean by that? Well, we already have a line of controls that step out in front of our photo and video shutters on the Edge Plus. And then when we want to use one of these settings, it steps out another slider, which just sort of further encroaches on our composition window. And while Samsung does have more stuff for you to control quickly right from your main composition window, I really like that the G4 is giving you more information on your capture and your exposure. I think it's funny that they include the aperture because the aperture on a smartphone is fixed, but we have shutter speed, we've got the ISO, we've got the exposure here, so we can see if we're over or underexposing. It tells you what kind of focus is enabled. It tells you what the white balance Kelvin value is. And then we have a histogram. And right now that histogram is pinned all the way to the left because there's nothing to take a photo of. The camera sensor is right on top of a table, but this will give you a very clear visual indication of what your exposure is doing. While Samsung is giving us a few more quick toggle controls like effects and metering and the timer, we don't get that same kind of information to quickly check if our photos are going to be properly exposed. And on smartphone cameras, both of these cameras, I think, tend to overexpose when left to their own devices. So it's nice to be able to see very quickly where you are on the G4. I have to flip that script when it comes to the Samsung for video. Our video settings and options on the G4 are a bit limited. We have UHD, Full HD, 720p, and then slow motion. Whereas on the Samsung, we've got UHD, Quad HD, and then 60 frame per second 1080p. And so this is really the decision that I make when I'm shooting videos. Do I want more resolution for a prettier scene, or do I really want to capture liquidy, smooth, fast action? And I can make that choice on the Galaxy where I can't make that choice on the G4. Plus, LG still does not give us exposure control while shooting video. So we have all these amazing photography tools to control the exposure and the output of our photos, but on the Galaxy, if the scene's a little bright, you can sort of darken it at a couple stops, or if it's really dark, you can tell the phone, hey, expose this brighter. You have that control in video on the Galaxy where we don't on the LG. We start talking about things like battery life, and that's been a little difficult for me to pin down and to offer up really consistent methods of testing. When these phones are just sort of sitting here doing nothing but keeping up with my notifications, I think Samsung does actually have a better standby mode. But when I'm out and about, so for example, when I'm driving around Southern California, I have a Bluetooth connection for my car audio. I have a second Bluetooth connection to the car computer. I'm usually running some kind of turn-by-turn navigation while streaming audio, and I might take a phone call or two while the phone is also still keeping up with all of my email and social media accounts. When we get into that kind of mixed usage, the power management advantages from Samsung seem to weigh in a little bit less, and I get closer. I get more similar battery runtime from these two phones. Again, your mileage may vary. Another nice little hardware advantage on Samsung is, of course, this fingerprint scanner. I think this is a little bit more difficult to use than the fingerprint scanner on the regular sized S6, just for how long and tall the phone is. But for those of you interested in biometric security, you have a fingerprint scanner on the Edge Plus where you do not have one on the LG G4. And that clicky hardware button does give us one extra shortcut where a double tap will bring us into our camera. A long press on the home button will give us the option of using whatever digital assistant we might have installed on the phone. Although I will be curious to see how a hardware button interacts with Android Marshmallow as we start using Now on Tap. Now, obviously we don't have the double tap to get to our camera on the home button. That's actually on the volume button on the G4, but we do still have the shortcut to get to our digital assistant by sliding from the home button. So that's kind of a wash. As I mentioned in my full review on the Edge, we do have this little side panel dock. This is an additional place where we can keep shortcuts to contacts and to some of our most commonly used apps. I'm just so used to the rest of the Android UI from playing with other phones that I typically don't think to look for Samsung's solution for these little custom widgety things. But I think someone who owns the Edge Plus over a year or two will probably use these types of features a lot more often. While we don't have a home button or a fingerprint scanner to turn the phone on from, we do have knock codes, and tapping out a pattern on the screen will light up our display. Again, this is a nice ergonomic touch in that you don't have to reach down to the very bottom edge of the phone to hit a power button and then have it scan your fingerprint. You can just tap out a special code to unlock your device. Though obviously the fingerprint scanner does also come with the benefit of providing you security for things things like payment solutions, and I'm still waiting on my invite for Samsung Pay. I want to play with that so bad. Adding more complexity to the battery discussion, both of these phones implement some form of quick charging, though I did think it was kind of janky that LG did not include a quick charger in the box on the G4, but you can go and buy one from Amazon. They're pretty cheap. But you can pop the back cover off the G4 to get to the battery if you ever need to swap it out. Now, I'm not the kind of person who walks around with a spare internal battery. I actually use external batteries because I probably have more than one phone on me at any given time. But one of my favorite upgrades is to wait around a year as this battery is starting to degrade a little, and then buying a new replacement battery. And then I can pop in a new battery, and it's like I've got brand new phone battery life all over again, and then I have a spare if I ever need it. I've been very impressed with the quick charge capabilities on the Edge Plus. I do think it charges a little bit faster than the Qualcomm chipset on the G4. And since I would never expect to be able to pop off the back plate on a glass phone, and I still really wish that Samsung had given us a larger battery on their phablet size phone, especially after using the S6 Active, I'm really happy to see that wireless charging's been built in from the get-go. You don't have to mess with a case or some sort of special back plate. You just pop the phone down on a Qi charger and it fires right up, starts charging. Again, I just think it's fascinating. Both of these phones have 3,000 milliamp hour batteries, and battery performance can be pretty similar, but how they handle power management is very different. I can already hear some of the arguments between fans of these different handsets. Oh, my phone charges faster, or, oh, you can charge your phone as fast as you want. It's never going to be as fast as me just swapping the battery. Yeah, I gotta say, I kind of love the nerd rage that happens when we start comparing features like these. And while I've got the back of the G4 off, I would be remiss in my duties as a gadget reviewer if I didn't at least bring up the topic of storage, where both of these phones have 32 GBs built into them, which means you get around 25 GBs after you account for formatting and all of the preloaded software and a little buffer space for upgrades. But the G4 still includes a micro SD card slot, allowing us to upgrade storage. And so I've got my high-speed 32 gig card in here. I've got a 128 gig card lying around here somewhere. And that's a way more cost-effective storage upgrade than the extra $100 to bump the Edge Plus up to 64. And I'm still very disappointed that we haven't heard from Samsung about a 128 gigabyte model for their premier flagship phablets. And you would think that with the fixation that Samsung has with competing with Apple right now, that if the iPhone 6s has a 128 gigabyte option, that the S6 Edge Plus would also have a 128 gigabyte option. And that brings us down to audio. Both of these phones are pretty close in terms of overall loudness, but I do think I generally prefer the audio quality on Samsung solutions. The headphone jack's a little bit more comparable. I think the audio quality on both of these phones is pretty nice. But one of the clear advantages, one of the big wins that I'll give Samsung is actually audio over Bluetooth. I still haven't been able to sort out the sort of whine or high-pitched audio distortion that I get. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there on the G4, whereas I don't have that issue on the S6 Edge Plus or the Note 5 at all. And so I think when I'm in my car and I'm listening to music or I'm listening to podcasts, it's a slightly more enjoyable experience listening to audio there, and it's a little bit more distracting. It's a little harsher, a little tinnier coming off of the G4. I'm not gonna do that janky thing where let's go through the notification shades and page through home screens to show off UI performance. They're both pretty quick phones, though I do think that the Edge Plus has actually been just a little bit snappier navigating around the UI, pulling up apps. It is definitely more powerful hardware, especially when we get into gaming. You can fire up a game like Marvel Future Fight, and it's like the difference between moving from a nice console gaming experience to a premium gaming PC experience. So to wrap up, I think we should probably also talk about price. And one of the reasons why it's kind of difficult to talk about these various flagship devices. I've seen the unlocked 815 version of the G4 go for as low as $430, and you're still eligible to pick up one of their cutesy extra battery packs or backplate combo deals. The Edge Plus is a newer phone and it is built out of more premium materials, but the 32 gigabyte model is gonna come in at $815 if you shop it on AT&T. So bullet point for bullet point, I think the Edge 6 Plus wins more of our comparison, but I don't know that this is really $400 more phone than the LG G4. But this takes us up into a tier where we're really moving beyond function for the purchase, and we are talking more about form, fashion, lifestyle. If this fits into your look, if this fits into your aesthetic, if you want to spend more on that premium look, well, then that makes a little bit more sense. If we're comparing purses, this is a really nice functional functional purse that you can pick up from Target. This is a little bit more of a Louis Vuitton. Do both purses achieve basically the same overall function? Absolutely. But one purse will be a bit more of a conversation point when you bring it to a fancy dinner party. But of course, I want to hear from you folks. When we're shopping a flagship phone, do we care more about overall function? Are we becoming more interested in the fashion accent that our smartphones are becoming as they become more a part of our daily lives? With so much competition out in the smartphone marketplace, what can companies do to get your money to buy these products? Definitely drop me a comment down below. Those are the kinds of conversations I love getting into. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe for more rambling comparisons like these. And I would not be able to continue producing on this channel if you all weren't out there supporting it by hitting the fan funding, by grabbing yourself a free audiobook from Audible on the link below this video, by signing up for a Loot Crate so you can get yourself some fun, cool, geeky gamer gear, and of course by sharing my videos on your favorite social sites like Reddit and Facebook and Twitter and the Googles+. So please keep bringing more cool people to the party. Hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next comparison.